Dear Esther, the gulls do not land here anymore.
A contemplative walk around a deserted island is underscored by a mysterious correspondence in Dear Esther. That's coming up next on JO42 Reviews. When I reviewed pools, I did a brief recap of the history of so-called walking simulators, the genre that began as a somewhat derisive catch-all term for games that involved walking through a largely deserted locale and gleaning the story from context clues rather than plot-driven interactivity. By now, we all know the classics of the genre, with Gone Home being the controversial figurehead, but Dear Esther is undoubtedly the first of the genre. When I picked up Dear Esther, I wasn't looking for something to review, just something to escape into. Regular viewers to my channel are probably tired of me talking about how I have spent 2025 detoxing from Lexapro, a powerful prescription antidepressant whose withdrawal process is crushing and sickening on a good day. As I sit to write this review, and I am in a state of anhedonia, not able to really enjoy anything or feel real emotions outside of confusion, fear, and regret. And though I know that this is only temporary and happens every time I lower my dosage, it still feels as though happiness is a long lost memory, and every day feels like a 24-hour loop of Pariah by Steve Wilson and Ninette Tayeb. And when you're in a mindset like that, something like the dreary, gently melancholic world of Dear Esther just calls to you. Or at least it did me. And understanding that mindset is also crucial to understanding why, as beautiful as it is, I just cannot recommend this game. At this point, I should also pause and emphasize that to properly make my point, I will have to spoil the ending. Plan your viewing accordingly. The premise of Dear Esther is simple enough. The player begins on the dock of a vacant Hebridean island and walks slowly but deliberately through misty, rolling hills as a letter is read in voiceover. Through the course of a very slow stroll across the island, we learn that this is a letter written to the protagonist's deceased wife. The sun sets and the island becomes a little more surreal, but mostly it's just a walk and a letter. We learn that Esther died in a car accident and that the player character has some personal history with the island over a fairly short playtime. This might sound like an odd comparison at first, but walking simulators are essentially the M. Night Shyamalan movies of the video game world. I say that because Shyamalan movies are built around plot twists, and as such, they lose their replay value after the first viewing. By the same token, walking simulators don't offer much in the way of replayability. You hear the whole story, and the story is separate from the minimal interactivity, so there's nothing in the mechanics to motivate a second playthrough like more traditional games. The best walking simulators, for example Pools or The Beginner's Guide, offer a surrealistic, dreamlike world that is engaging in its own right. But Dear Esther, despite having its occasional flourishes of beautiful design, is aggressively linear. There are a few opportunities to check out deserted buildings and caves along the way, but mostly we're just on a fixed path in a world where being able to stroll aimlessly would have been appealing. Throughout the game, the tone is gentle and contemplative, and Jessica Curry's somber, bittersweet soundtrack does a wonderful job of underscoring the effects of this grieving widower being alone with his thoughts on a deserted island. But then we reach the end, and, well, in the words of Patton Oswalt, it takes a hard left turn into Assholeville. The game ends with the player character committing suicide by jumping from the top of a radio tower. Just before hitting the ground, the protagonist flies away as if to suggest becoming an angel or something else supernatural, but the director's commentary confirms that it is a death by suicide. And this ending is just not acceptable to me. I know all too well how depression, emptiness, and fear can commingle into a bittersweet mindset where suicide seems beautiful, poetic, and liberating. But that is a very, very toxic delusion initiated by an ailing mind, not a healthy way to process grief or commemorate the passing of a lost loved one. There are a few blink and you missed it context clues throughout the game that indicate that the player character is caught in a sort of endless loop, perhaps indicating that this suicidal stroll through the island is an eternal punishment for a spirit who died in an immoral way. If that's the case, then it would help to have that undercurrent more firmly established, as it would underscore the unacceptability of suicide. Instead, we are going through what is set up as a means of processing grief, only to finally throw the grieving process out the window altogether and end the game in the most morbid and heartbreaking way possible. But beyond that, this brash and exploitative ending misses out on what could have been a very poignant close to an otherwise gentle experience. We could have ended by climbing to the highest peak on the island and spreading Esther's ashes, or having an encounter with her ghost, or something else that actually addresses the real process of grieving, rather than just going for the cheapest cheap shot. Dear Esther arrived on the scene at a time when critics were calling for games that dealt with more serious adult themes, rather than catering to the crowd that was only interested in one interchangeable shoot 'em up after another, and it was held up as an early promise of deeper themes and storylines to come from indie developers. The best I can say is that it almost delivered. So, in light of that awful ending, I will acknowledge the genuine artistry in Dear Esther, but I cannot recommend it. Thumbs down. If you enjoyed this review, please consider becoming a supporter at patreon.com/Jordan42, and be sure to check out my new album Flipside Traveler, available on all major streaming platforms.